Okay, so today we're diving into something pretty heavy, huh? We're taking a close look at some of the reactions to what's happening in Rafah.
Yeah, you sent over a transcript, right, from a YouTube video. The title was "How Will Israel End? What Does Quran Say?" It was from the Towards Eternity channel.
Right, and it's got that hashtag Aliyah in Rafah too.
Yeah, and this one's it's intense. It doesn't hold back. It's full of raw emotion about this whole tragedy, but it also, you know, tries to make sense of everything through a religious lens.
I mean, it really gives you a sense of how some people are processing this, like not just the facts, but like the why, and that's what we're going to try to do today, right? Go beyond just the speaker's feelings and really unpack what they're saying,
Hmm.
the details, the comparisons they use, the whole religious framework they're working with.
Exactly.
Like you shared this because you wanted to grasp the depth of the emotion and the different ways people are understanding this.
Yep.
Okay, so right off the bat, the video starts with this huge outpouring of grief and just disbelief. I mean, the speaker is clearly heartbroken about the lives lost in Rafah, especially the women and children.
Yeah, and right away there's this accusation. The speaker says that those responsible for the deaths, they know exactly what they've done.
Like they know the consequences.
Yeah, and it makes you question, the whole moral side of things, like what were they thinking?
Right, and the speaker keeps coming back to this idea that they just can't understand how anyone could do this. Like there's just a completely different sense of right and wrong at play here.
Uh-huh.
And then, they paint this incredibly vivid picture of Rafah after the attack, burning tents, people holding the bodies of their children. It's just horrifying.
It's very deliberate though.
Yeah.
They're trying to make it real for people. So it's not just about numbers, it's about the human cost. And they talk about Palestinians with family in Rafah frantically searching through videos, trying to find their loved ones.
Oh, that's just heartbreaking. Imagine the not knowing, the waiting.
Awful. Just awful.
And then there's this really interesting shift. I mean, 1 minute they're talking about this immense grief, and then it's like, boom, they're saying, don't be sad, don't be afraid, don't lose hope. And then they kind of brush off the Organization of Islamic Cooperation's condemnation.
Right. You pick up on that too, huh?
Mm.
I think that shows just how frustrated people are. Like, a condemnation isn't enough. They want to see real action.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people are feeling that way.
Totally.
And that frustration, it's not just directed at international organizations, right? The speaker also calls out what they call the sellout leaders of the Middle East and the silence from so much of the world.
Mm-hmm. There's definitely anger there. Like, where are the people who can actually make a difference?
Exactly. They even mentioned the International Court of Justice calling for the attacks to stop. But again, it's like, what good is that if no one's going to enforce it? And then they go on to propose a pretty radical solution, I guess you could say, a global embargo on Israel.
Oh, yeah. Like cutting off everything.
Yeah.
Oil, airspace, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting because it shows you how strongly they believe in the power of, like, collective action. Like, if the whole world came together, they think Israel would have to back down.
And they don't just blame Israel for why this hasn't happened. They talk about these sellout leaders again and other, conflicting interests getting in the way.
Yeah. It all comes down to unity, or the lack of it. And then we get into the details of the Rafah attack itself. The speaker reminds everyone that Israel told Palestinians to move south to Rafah because it was a safe zone.
But it wasn't safe at all.
No.
Yeah.
And it's even worse when you realize that they'd already been displaced like 7 or 8 times before ending up in Rafah.
Well, they had nowhere else to go.
Exactly.
And then the attack, 8 rockets hitting the area while people were sleeping, turning their tents into fire. The first reports were, 45 dead? But everyone knew that number was going to go up.
Right. Tragic. And then the speaker goes on to compare what happened in Rafah to Hitler,
Yeah.
To genocide. They even say that gathering people in safe zones is like the gas chambers.
Wow. That's a very strong comparison.
It is. And it's bound to be controversial,
Yeah.
but it shows just how deeply they feel betrayed. They see this as a deliberate act, not just a mistake. Like, Israel designated Rafah as safe and then bombed it anyway. And they even question whether, with all of Israel's technology, they could have really launched 8 rockets by accident. This is where the speaker really shifts from talking about the conflict as self-defense to calling it genocide. It's a big turning point in the video.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And then the speaker lays out these just devastating statistics. Over 15,000 children dead. Over 10,000 women, a total of almost 36,000. Over 80,000 injured. And it's not just about the physical injuries, right? They talk about the unimaginable traumas and entire communities just being wiped out.
It's hard to even fathom the scale of it. And,
Right.
even those who survived, they've lost so much: family, friends, their
Mm.
homes.
It's unfathomable. And then to really bring it home, they share the story of this 5-year-old boy, Faisal Ahmad al-Khalid. He saw his parents killed. His mother was pregnant too.
I know, I know. It's just so hard to read. And they talk about how Faisal, how he doesn't even react. Like he's completely shut down emotionally.
Oh gosh, it's just awful. The speaker does say that Faisal's family is in heaven now, trying to offer some comfort.
Right.
But still, the trauma this little boy has experienced, it's hard to imagine. And this leads into the speaker criticizing inaction, specifically from a religious point of view. They ask, why haven't Muslim leaders done more? Why haven't they stepped up? And they contrast that with the teachings of Islam, even referencing the Prophet Muhammad's compassion. They make the point that Islam is about more than just prayer and fasting. It's about standing up against oppression, too.
This is really important for understanding where the speaker is coming from. It's not just about politics for them. Their faith is central to how they see this whole situation. And it's not just about personal faith either. It's about taking action when you see injustice.
Right, right. And then there's this call to action. It's very strong, very direct. The speaker criticizes Middle Eastern leaders, influential figures, for not speaking out. They even contrast them with Pep Guardiola, the football manager.
Out of all people.
I know, but he spoke out, and these leaders didn't. And the speaker says they're basically morally dead. And then there's this powerful idea they bring up about how their grandchildren will judge them. They'll ask, what did you do during the Palestinian genocide?
Heavy stuff. And that criticism, it extends to, celebrities and people with big platforms. They might be vocal about other issues, but they're silent on this one.
Right, like where are they? And the speaker really believes in the power of public pressure. They even say that the U.S. has changed its stance a bit because of it. So they're encouraging people to speak out, write, share information, vote, use your voice to make a difference.
It's about grassroots activism. People coming together and forcing change from the bottom up.
And then there's this part where they really go after people who are staying neutral, who are saying they don't care. They say that if you don't care about children dying, no matter who they are, then there's something wrong with you. Like you're morally rotten, a slave to comfort. It's pretty harsh.
Yeah, they're not mincing words. But their point is, this isn't something you can just ignore. You have to take a stand.
Okay, so the speaker then goes on to talk about how things were portrayed after October 7th, how the information that came out at first, it might not have given the whole picture.
Right, like the context was missing.
Yeah, and they urge listeners to, put aside any prejudices and just look at the facts. It's about right and wrong, they say, especially when you're talking about genocide. And then they speak directly to Americans. They point out that U.S. tax dollars are going to support Israel, and they say that without that support, the killings wouldn't be happening on the same scale.
Right, and they acknowledge that some Americans might feel guilty about that.
But they also say that Americans have the power to change things, to, create public pressure, to vote for change. They even talk about Sheikh Omar Suleiman and how he feels guilty about his taxes going towards this.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so then the speaker brings up the casualty figures again. Over 35,000 dead since October 7th. And they talk about how some of the things Israel said right after that about decapitated children and women being raped, well, they say none of that turned out to be true.
Right, like the evidence wasn't there.
Exactly. And then there's this really graphic description of a child who was killed in Rafah. They even warn people that it might be disturbing to hear. And then they ask you to imagine the opposite happening. Imagine if Palestinians had killed that many Israelis, including children, how would the world react? And they're basically saying there's a huge double standard here.
It's a disturbing thought experiment, but it definitely makes you think.
It does. And then the speaker quotes a hadith about how you have to stand up against evil. You can do it with your actions, your words, or at the very least in your heart. But you have to do something. Even if it's just in your heart, that's still the weakest form of faith.
So you can't just stand by and do nothing. You have to take a stand in whatever way you can.
Right. Okay, so the video ends with a section called The End of Israel and Divine Justice. And the speaker says that everyone who's responsible for these atrocities, they will face judgment, both in this life and the next. They even say it'll happen in 40 to 50 years. Like, divine justice will be served. And they say that the rights of the oppressed will be restored.
There's a sense of hope there, Like, even though things are so bad now, there's a belief that ultimately justice will prevail.
And they talk about the martyrs, particularly the children who have died. They say they're at peace now, in paradise. But those who are still alive, they're still in pain. And it's our responsibility to help them heal, to keep fighting for justice.
That's a powerful message. It's not over just because some people have found peace.
Yeah.
We have to keep going for the sake of those who are still suffering.
Right. And then finally, the speaker gives a Quranic interpretation about the future of Israel. They talk about a chapter in the Quran called Suratul Isra. And they say that it talks about how the Jewish people were punished for their actions in the past, like they were exiled by the Babylonians and the Romans. And there's this verse, "Perhaps your Lord will have mercy on you, but if you return to sin, we will return to punishment." So they're saying if the oppression continues, history will repeat itself.
It's about cycles of oppression, right? And how they ultimately lead to their own downfall. Like when things get really bad, people finally wake up and say, enough.
And the speaker ends with a prayer for the destruction of the oppressors. Wow, that was a lot.
Yeah. Intense, but, important to hear.
Absolutely. It really gives you a sense of the raw emotion, the anger, the grief, and the deeply held beliefs that are shaping how some people are seeing this conflict. You wanted to understand that perspective, and I think we've gotten a pretty good glimpse of it today.
Yeah, we have.
It's heavy stuff, but it's a side of the story that needs to be heard, right? So, as we finish up, I have to ask, considering everything we've discussed, everything the speaker talked about, what role do you think individual conscience and global public opinion can really play in shaping what happens next? It's something to think about for sure.
No easy answers.
Thanks.